Okay, today we're going to be learning Pesachim Daf Mem Daled. Today's shir is sponsored by Sharon Hausdorff in memory of her mother, Minna Friedman, Menucha Bat Moshe Yechezkel Zichronah Livracha, on her 10th Yortzeit, and by Susan Kashdan in memory of her dear father, Yitzchak Ben Moshe Chuna, on his 12th Yortzeit. He so inspired me with a deep love of Hebrew and lifelong learning, enabling me to work here in Israel and to learn Daf Yomi. And by Susan Shabsels in honor of Elisheva Rappaport. Ellie, thanks for making our Daf Yomi meetings happen each week. Okay, we're going to get started from the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Bet. Just reminding you, lots of people already have registered. Please register for the new class that's starting next week. It will be on Mondays, 8:30 Israel time. You're invited to come. It'll be a class to learn how to gain skills for learning Gemara and deal with in-depth sugyot about Leil HaSeder, about the Seder night that will lead up to, we'll be finishing just before the Seder. So please feel free to join. There's one in Hebrew by Rabbi Chana Dreyfus. The whole course is together with Yeshivat Drisha. So please join. And if you're having any issues with registration, some people it was an easy process, some people it was more complicated. First of all, I recommend using a computer to register. It works better than on the telephone. And if you have any questions, just email us at info@hadran.org.il. Okay, Amar Rabbi Aval. We're starting from the bottom of Mem Gimel Amud Bet. Today's daf, we have some very basic. It's always nice when once in a while you get to one of those pages that has really basic topics that relate to all sorts of topics in the Gemara and are very basic. Unfortunately, in a Shir Daf Yomi, we can't go in depth as much as we'd like to understand it really much more in depth. There's a lot of depth to these topics, but we'll understand it as best as we can on a simple level, try to go in depth a little bit. Amar Rabbi Avav, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So we're now going to have this statement, which is going to basically take us throughout most of the daf. Kol isurin shebetorah en heter mitzdaref liisur chutz miisurei nazir. Sharei amra Torah mishrat. Anything that's forbidden by the Torah. Okay, generally we assume we're talking about eating, although we're going to see it's not always eating. The requisite amount is a kizayit, an olive bulk. And what does that mean? That you have to have a kizayit of what's forbidden. If you have a combination, now you understand why we're talking about this, because we talked about, let's say, the kuta chabavli that has chametz mixed in, and you don't really see it. So if you have this mixture of heter and isser, and you eat a kizayit of the mixture, okay, the whole question now becomes, is it a kizayit of the mixture, or is it a kizayit of what's forbidden in the mixture? So we say in general, according to Rabbi Yochanan, in all Torah issues, we say, or all cases of forbidden, things that are forbidden, we don't say that they combine and all you need is a kizayit of the combination to be liable. No, you need a kizayit of what's forbidden, okay? Except for one exception. It's one exception only, the nazir. The nazir is not allowed to drink wine or anything made from grapes. And it says there, B'chol mishrat anavim, okay? It says, B'chol mishrat anavim lo yishteh. He can't drink anything soaked in grapes. So what do they learn from that? Oh, you can't eat anything soaked in grapes. So what's forbidden? The item that's soaked in grapes. So if you have bread that's soaked in grape juice or wine, so how much of that mixture do you have to eat to be obligated? Well, there, you don't have to drink an olive bulk of wine. Now, it's actually weird to think of an olive bulk because liquids are usually measured in revi'it. But since what you're eating is food, so we're going to say, you need to eat a kizayit of the bread. If you eat a kizayit of bread, which is soaked in wine, even though you didn't eat a kizayit of wine, you'll be liable. I see someone's asking about batzal b'shishim. Wait, we're going to hold off on this. It's going to come up later. Okay, and this is why I say this stuff is very complicated because the interplay between this and another sugya we're going to see later is a little bit complicated. How this all works out. It's one of those things that you like to organize things as clearly as you can. It's not so clear cut here, how all these things interplay. So he says, you cannot have heter mitzaref lisur except for nazir because it says something soaked. So it seems like the subject is the bread. So therefore, if you eat a kazayit of the bread, you're liable. But normally, if it's a mixture and the forbidden item is no longer recognizable, like let's say the kutach, you would have to eat a kazayit of the kutach to be obligated, of the bread in the kutach to be liable, not the combination itself. Ze'eri amar, but Ze'eri disagrees with this, and he says, af se'or bal taktiru. And here, this is actually not forbidden because of eating. This is what we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, that at the end of yesterday's shir. This is the end of yesterday's stuff. Se'or bal tiru means you're not allowed to burn on the altar anything that's leavened. Remember, you take the mincha, the meal offering, if it leavens, it's a problem. And then we saw the drasha of Rabbi Eliezer. What did he say? That sounds to be only if it's the whole mixture is leavened. What if only part of it is? He said, oh, it says kol. Then we said, what if it's in a mixture, right? It's combined, that you have two kmitzas that you took, right? Two sections, parts that are supposed to be burned on the altar. One is leavened, one isn't, and you burn them at the same time. How do you know you're also obligated? And then we say, because it says ki kol. Remember, that was Rabbi Eliezer's drasha, because he darshans kol, and then he darshans ki kol, and he darshans it there. So now, according to him, se'or bal tiru is another case where in the end, obviously, we're not talking about you had a whole kazayit of se'or, because otherwise, why would you need to say you're liable if you mixed it with heter? Of course, if you mixed it with heter, you had a whole kazayit. So it must be you had half a kazayit of a kmitza that was leavened, half a kazayit of this kmitza that wasn't leavened. Remember, the kmitza is when the kohen you make this whole dough, the kohen puts his 3 middle fingers in and he scoops out a little bit. That's the part that gets burned on the altar. So you had less than a kazayit of that, and you burned it at the same time as you burned a half a kazayit, let's say, of a regular one that wasn't leavened. You're going to be obligated. So what do we say? You're going to be liable. So what do we say? According to that, that would be another case of heter mitzaref li'isur, because you're counting the kazayit, including what is permitted. So comes the Gemara and says, wait, if you're going to say that he adds that one case, he should have more than one case, because what's the comparable case to that? The kutach habavli case, remember? So I'm sorry, the chametz in general on Pesach. It doesn't have to be the kutach, but kutach is a good example. When chametz is mixed in, right? So he says like this, kiman kirabel. The whole thing of se'or bal tiru is forbidden because of eruvo, because even when it's in a mixture, that's like Rabbi Eliezer, Didarish kol, who has the whole drasha of kol. Ihachi le'inyan chametz v'pesach nami. Remember Rabbi Eliezer yesterday? What did he say? When you have eruv of chametz, you have a ta'arovet. It's mixed in and it's blended in and you can't even identify it, like the kutach is a good example. Then you should also say heter mitzaref li'isur, because if we say that Rabbi Eliezer will say it by se'or, he would also say it here, because according to him, they're exactly the same thing. And they're even darshan from the exact same word, kol. So therefore, they say, oh, in fact, inachinami. It's true. Ze'eri means also chametz on Pesach. Will be a case of heter mitzaref li'isur. Now we know really why this is here, because that's important, right? So let's say the kutach, according to Ze'eri, if you eat kutach habavli, which has some chametz mixed in, you don't even see it. It's not identifiable. The amount you have to eat is a kazayit of kutach, not a kazayit of chametz. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, how much would you have to eat? A kazayit of the chametz in the kutach. Okay, we're going to get back to that. Okay, that's the clear machloket between the two of them, because Rabbi Yochanan says heter mitzaref li'isur is only by nazir, not anywhere else in the Torah. And Ze'eri adds some other cases. So now they say, wait, if you meant also chametz b'Pesach, then why did Ze'eri specifically say se'or bal tiru? Why did he bring only that case? So now they say, well, it's not exactly clear why he brought only that case, but the point is he brought that case because he wanted to highlight some other halacha. And he wanted to tell you that I don't hold like so-and-so when it comes to a different issue having to do with the mincha. What is that? La'afuke mida Abaye. He wanted to say, I disagree with Abaye about the following. Da'amar yesh haktara lepachot mikazayit. Abaye says that when you burn something on the altar, right, normally we say kazayit is for eating. Here, this is not an eating issue. This is burning something on the altar. Abaye says, if you burn even a small amount of an item that leavened, of let's say a meal offering that leavened, you offer it on the altar, you're obligated. First of all, the pasuk says, Ki kol se'or v'chol dvash lo tachtiu. Any se'or, any honey, right? Any leavened item, any honey are not allowed. So comes Abaye and he says, any means any amount, right? Even a little bit. Now, what's the reason for that? This reminds us of what we learned, if you remember, when we talked about susceptibility to impurity. What did we say? We said that in order for something to become susceptible to impurity, it needs water poured on it. But if you remember, we said that when it comes to a sacrifice, possibly you don't need it, because the fact that what's the whole idea of susceptibility to impurity and water falling on it, something's not important unless water gets on it first. Because if you don't wash it, no one's going to eat it. So it could be when it comes to sacrifices that you don't need that, because the fact that you're putting it on the altar already makes it important. So you could say the same thing here. You don't need a kazayit according to Abaye, because anything you're going to burn on the altar, you obviously think it's significant. So the fact that it's less than a kazayit doesn't make a difference to us. You gave it importance. It's in Hebrew, or in Aramaic, the term is achshaveh. You thought of it as chashuv, as important. So you gave it importance. That means now it's important. So according to this, we're now going to say, Abaye thinks yesh haktara lepachot mikazayit. Now, what does this have to do with our topic? Kamash malam, when Ze'eri came to tell us, even seor heter mitzaref leisur, what's he telling us? What's underlying what he says? If you need to say heter mitzaref leisur to get to your kazayit, what do you obviously mean? You need at least a kazayit. It's just a matter of how do you measure that kazayit? Do you count only the leavened part, or can you mix it with, if you put it together with something that wasn't leavened and you burnt it all at the same time? According to Ze'eri, we can count that all as a kazayit. But you see, he says it has to be a kazayit, an olive bulk, if we're going to obligate you. So that's what he wanted to teach you. Kamash malan dehaktara lav b'pachot mikazayit. You will not be liable if you burn something on the altar that's leavened, that's less than a kazayit. You will be if you mixed it with something that wasn't leavened and you burnt that all together. As the amount that you have to burn on the altar has to be a kazayit. It's just, it could be heter and isser together. Okay, the main thing that we need to know going forward is this machloket Ze'eri Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan thinks that heter mitzaref leisur, again, you want to count how much of a kazayit that you ate. You count it with heter and isser together only in the case of the nazir, when you have wine soaking, you have bread soaked wine. But when it comes to Ze'eri, he thinks that there's more exceptions to, there's more cases where this would apply, like the Seor, like the Pesach case, okay? Like chametz on Pesach. Again, if it's in a mixture and you can't really identify the chametz, then we're going to say, we're going to count the amount of the mixture that you ate and not the amount of chametz that you ate. So even if you eat a mixture and you ate actually less than a kazayit, you're still going to be obligated. Now, Yatziv Rav Dimi v'ka'amar la lahashmate. Rav Dimi sat and taught the following. Now, it's not clear what the following is. Rashi tells us, and it's clear from the continuation, that he taught Rabbi Yochanan. So we're now focusing in on Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, who said, Nazir is the only case, nothing else. So Amar le Abaye le Rav Dimi. Abaye says to Rav Dimi, wait, you don't think this applies in other cases? And now he's going to say why he thinks it should apply in other cases. The Hatznan, the first part of this mission is not relevant to us, but the second part is hamikpeh shel truma. You have like a porridge type of mixture made from, you have porridge that's truma. Okay, it's made from grains that were truma. And then what happened? Hashum v'hashemen shel chulin. Mixed in, you had garlic to season it, and you had oil. That was chulin. Now, what's the major part of it? The mikpah, right? The porridge. V'nagat tful yom b'miktsatan. What happened? The main part of this is truma. If someone who's a tful yom, what's a tful yom? Remember, it's a type of tameh. You were tameh for whatever reason. You went to the mikveh in the morning, so you're somewhat pure, but you're not allowed to eat truma yet. So the rabbis instituted that anything you touch, right, if it's truma, remember the rabbis treat him as a sheni, not as a regular person who's tameh, because he already went to the mikveh, she went to the mikveh, but if they come in contact and touch anything, if it's chulin, it's nothing, because they're a sheni, they make it a shlishi. There is no such thing as shlishi by chulin, except for that one opinion we saw, but normally no. And then if they touch truma, though, they're going to disqualify the truma. Okay, so now they say, if nagat tful yom b'miktsatan, pasalet kulam. If he touched part of the porridge, since the porridge is all truma, he touched part of it, the entire porridge is tameh, and we call it pasul. It's done, right? What do you do with it? You burn it. But if it's the reverse case, and this is the case that's important for our purposes, hamikpah shel chulin v'hashum v'hashemen shel truma. If the porridge was chulin, was regular, but the condiments, extra stuff, was truma. Now that is very secondary, right? It's not so important, and it's not a lot. And nagat tful yom b'miktsatan, and the tful yom touched part of it, similar, right? Same as in the first case. Lo pasal elama komaga obilvat. The only thing that becomes disqualified is the place where you touched it, meaning not the rest of it. So now they want to understand the havinamba mekomaga o amai psula. Why should it even be a problem? What should we normally say here? Now, even though truma, we generally say, is not nullified, it's only nullified 1 in 100, but still, that's for eating purposes. This is for purity and impurity. If you looked at that combination, generally when it comes to Torah law, we follow the majority. The majority of this is chulin. It's not truma at all. So how can we say just because there's oil and there's garlic in there, that's going to change the whole, that we're going to now say you're going to make this impure? Most of this isn't even truma at all. So what do they say? Right? So they ask, the spices, meaning, right, the garlic and the oil should be nullified into the majority of this. And you should just look at this as if it's a porridge that's chulin. Shouldn't be tameh at all. So okay, we're not yet back to our main point. We'll get there in a minute or two. But Rabba bar Chana, matam, what's the reason for this? Rabba bar Chana says, ho'il v'zar lokeh alehem b'kazayit. The reason is, if a non-Kohen were to eat this mixture, a kazayit of this, okay, now, what does it sound like? A kazayit of this, meaning a kazayit of the porridge, it sounds like we're saying, he would get lashes, lokeh alehem. Lashes means it's by Torah law forbidden. So what do they say? Since if someone were to eat this and they're not a Kohen, they would get lashes by Torah law. That means that we view that you can't just say the oil and the garlic are nullified, since for purposes of eating, they be liable. Therefore, truma also, we're going to say it can become tameh, impure. We're not going to say the entire thing. That's already going too far. But where he touched, we're going to assume is tameh. So that's the explanation for that. So now, the main line we want to deal with right now is Rabba bar Chana. Rabba bar Chana says that the reason is, so first of all, someone, right, Gita, you're asking the truma is rabbinic. It should be rabbinic because a tvul yom who's mitame something is usually only rabbinic in nature. Okay, as far as I think I'm correct about that, but usually the whole concept of a tvul yom being mitame is rabbinic. So now they say, hey chidami. So what's the case? Whereas, okay, Rabba bar Chana says a non-Kohen who eats this is going to get lashes if they eat a kazayit. So now the question is going to be, hey chidami, what are we talking about here? Kazayit of what? We assume kazayit of porridge. If that's the case, lav mishum de heter mitzaref lisur, and here comes Abaya's question on Rav Dimi. Says, you want to hold like Rabbi Yochanan, the heter mitzaref lisur is only by nazir. But here's a case of truma where we say heter mitzaref lisur because person's going to be liable, according to Rabbi bar Chana, if he ate a kazayit of the porridge, the mixture, which means heter mixes with isser. It has truma in it, which is, again, secondary for sure and not even identifiable. You can't see the garlics. You can't see the oil. It's mixed in. And yet we're going to forbid it. So the Gemara answers this question. Rav Dimi answers, and Rav Dimi says, Lo my kazayit, di'ika kazayit b'chtei achila pras. What does this mean? It means that you ate. Okay, how much porridge did you eat? You might have eaten 8 kizaitim, okay? 8 olive bulks in a time frame that, okay, now within, let's assume, I don't know what the ratio is, but let's assume if you ate 8 olive bulks, within those 8 olive bulks, there was oil and garlic to add up to 1. Let's say it was a ratio of 1 to 8, okay? So if you ate 8 olive bulks within a time period, here's the important part, okay? This we've learned before, but I'll remind you of it. Kedei achila pras is the time it takes to eat a half a loaf of bread. Okay, a loaf of what, the size that they had. This is the basic time frame for eating, for being liable for eating a kazayit. It also works for positive things. I'll give you some examples. Let's say there's a debate about if you drink a cup of tea, do you have to make a bracha after drinking the tea? Because if you sip your tea and you drink it over a period of half an hour, right? Or people, they say they milk their coffee, right? And you nurse your coffee. Sorry, you're nursing your coffee, right? You drink it a little bit, right? I see people on the Zoom drinking coffee as I speak. So if you drink it a little bit, right? Let's say you're at Daf Yomi Shir, you're sitting drinking your coffee, and from the beginning of the Shir to the end of the Shir, you finish your cup of coffee. You haven't drunk a revit in a time period of the time it would take to normally eat a half a loaf of bread. The time frame for that varies between 2 minutes, some people say, and 9 minutes. Okay, there's all sorts of ramifications of this halacha. The main point for our purposes, I don't want to spend too much time in it, is that if you ate, let's say, 8 olive bulks of this porridge within, let's just assume 9 minutes, which is the average time that people say la halacha. You eat it within 9 minutes. And within those 9 minutes, you manage to eat a kazayit of what was forbidden, then you're going to get lashes for it. And that's what he meant, not heter mitzaref l'isser. It's a case where you actually ate a kazayit of what was usser. Okay? That's how he explains it. So that's how Rav Dimi kind of supports Rabbi Yochanan's approach based on the question from this Mishnah. So now they're going to question Rav Dimi about this. Are you saying that if you have a mixture, now, first of all, you would think kazayit b'chtei lapras is d'oraita. What do you mean? First, let's understand where his question is coming from. It says you get lashes. If you get lashes, that means it's Torah law. So if I ate 8 olive bulbs of this porridge that had truma, right? I'm not a Kohen. I ate it. It has truma of garlic and oil of truma in it. In the time of 9 minutes, I ate 8 olive bulbs of the porridge, in which case I ate a kazayit of that. I'm going to be liable on a Torah level. Now, why would you think I wouldn't be liable? It seems pretty likely I'd be liable. But the Gemara seems to be asking it because the Gemara thinks the garlic and the oil, it's not like I ate something actually. It was mixed in and it was just kind of mixed up there. You didn't notice it. Why would I be liable for that if it's mixed up, disappeared? Okay, and this is part of what the whole question of today's daf is. All the issues we're going to discuss. If you don't see them anymore, it's like we saw yesterday. A revo, you have a tarovet with chametz in it, right? We don't call that actual chametz. Like you might have thought in the first place, how could we say kuta chabavli isn't asur mida oraita, right? And it's chametz, right? We call it tarovet and it's not kare. What do you mean? You ate chametz, but you don't see the chametz. It's not noticeable. Things have a very different status if you don't see them at all. So say it's really d'oraita. And Amar he says, oh yeah, it is d'oraita. What do you mean? No problem, it is. So they say, oh, wait a minute. If you're going to think it's d'oraita, and here comes the question with the kutach. Do you remember the rabbi said by kutach habavli, forget, okay, fine, it's not karet. I get that. Rabbi Eliezer said, but it is forbidden by a lo taseh of kol machmetza lo tochelu. And the rabbi said, remember, lo klum, it's not usher at all by Torah law, which again, we weren't sure whether that meant it's not usher or you're not liable to get lashes. But here, wouldn't you say, if you're going to say, we just said, you get lashes for eating this large amount. If you ended up within that large amount that you ate of porridge, you ate a kazayit of forbidden food. Well, the kutach also, you should say the exact same thing. If I eat enough kutach, okay, the one thing that comes to my mind, it's easy to imagine, is hummus, right? You eat hummus, and let's say in that hummus was a little bit of bread. If I had enough hummus that was mixed with the bread, right, that had the bread mixed in, that the bread amount I ate was a kazayit. So I would be liable, right? Wouldn't I be liable? In which case, why did the rabbis say that kutach is not, right? They say there's no lo taseh associated with it. So they say, okay, so if you think, now they're using this to reject that it's a kazayit b'chtei achila pras. So again, going back to, well, then what else could it be? Our first option, which is elamai mishum de heter mitzaref l'isur. You want to say it's because heter mitzaref l'isur? Well, then sof then also they shouldn't forbid kutach habavli, because they should also forbid it, because then you would, it's either or. It's either you ate a kazayit b'chtei achila pras, or you'd say you don't need to eat a kazayit b'chtei achila pras, heter mitzaref l'isur. That also, in other words, according to both tracks, the rabbis should say that kutach habavli is a problem, right? That's even more of a problem if you say heter mitzaref l'isur, because then you need to eat even less and you'd be liable. So how could neither of these make sense? So now they say, so sof amai plige rabbanan alei de Rabbi Eliezer b'kutach habavli, right? And in the end, the rabbis disagree, so this doesn't make any sense. So what do? They go back and they explain Rav Dimi, and they say, really, it's not because of heter mitzaref l'isur, because again, heter mitzaref l'isur, according to Rav Dimi, who holds like Rabbi Yochanan, is only by the nazir. Ella. So why in kutach habavli do the rabbis think you're not liable for eating it? Because Ella hanach lekutach habavli, and that's why I'm going to go back to my hummus example. Deleitle kazayit b'chtei achila pras. If you're eating porridge, I could see that maybe you get to eating 8 kazaitim and you can actually eat a whole kazayit of oil. But if you're eating hummus with a little bit of bread mixed in, you don't eat hummus straight. You eat it, right? Like porridge, you eat straight, and that's your whole meal theoretically. But hummus, you eat with bread. Okay, in this case, it's Pesach, so you're eating it with matzah, let's say. Okay, forget about hummus's kidney oat. Okay, I'm not talking about that. But assuming you're eating your matzah with your hummus, okay, in this case, it's with your kutach habavli. you're never going to get to the amount of a kazayit b'chtei achila pras. It's just not possible. And if it were, let's see, if you really ate it, whole kazayit, de kasarif ve'ka'achile, you downed a sick amount of it, that's not normal. Okay, you ate an abnormal amount. No normal human being would do that. So it can't be that. Like we're not going to. Batla dato means we go by the average person. The rabbis were talking about an average person who can't possibly eat that much. And if you're eating it not straight, a crazy person would eat it straight without anything. Nobody does that. Then maybe you could get to a kazayit. But if you're not eating it straight and you're eating it with bread or with matzah in this case, there's no way you would get to a kazayit b'chtei achila pras. You can't possibly in 9 minutes eat that much that you would eat a kazayit's worth of bread that's in the kutach. Just not possible. So that's why they say the kutach, the rabbis don't say you're liable, even though theoretically kazayit b'chtei achila pras is deoraita. Again, what does this mean? It's very important to understand for the continuation. Kazayit b'chtei achila pras deoraita means that if you eat something that's mixed up in something else and not noticeable and dissolved inside of it, and you eat enough of the big item that you would eat. This is like the opposing opinion of Heter Mitzaref L'Isser. Heter Mitzaref L'Isser says, well, now that there's Isser mixed in, we view this as all one whole. And therefore you eat a kazayit, you're eating Isser, even though you're not eating a kazayit of forbidden items. This is saying, no, if you have a combo, we don't view it. Now, each of them are saying, we don't view it as if you might have thought the Heter is canceled, right? Nullified to this whole big mixture because you can't see it anymore. I'm sorry, the Isser, the forbidden item is nullified and you don't see it anymore and therefore we don't consider it at all. That's not the case. We do consider it, but according to the second approach, we consider it only to the extent that you've actually eaten a kazayit of the forbidden item. So you have to eat a lot to get to that amount. Okay, that's the difference between that and Heter Mitzaref L'Isser. So now, Abaye is going to ask Rav Dimi 2 more questions on this idea. If you really think the kazayit b'chtei achila pras is forbidden to oraita, then why are we going to be lenient in the following 2 cases? And both of them, again, are truma cases. So Eitive, here we ask a question. Shtei kderot, you have 2 pots. Echad shel chulin ve'echad shel truma. Okay, one is chulin, one is truma. Again, one is problematic for a non-Kohen to eat, and one is not. Ulifnehem shtei medochot, you have 2 pestles, and echad shel chulin, one is full of spices that are chulin spices, and echad shel truma, one is full of spices that are truma spices. V'naflu elu l'toch elu, we've learned this case before, and one batch of spices falls into one pot, the other batch of spices falls into the other pot. Now, you could say the chulin fell into the truma, and then everything's problematic because everything's truma, or you could say the chulin went into chulin and the truma went into truma. So if you're going to say kazayit b'chtei achila pras is a problem, that means that we'd have to be concerned, right? If we don't use regular laws of nullifying, sorry, thank you, the mortar, not the pestle, sorry, I confused the terms, the mortar. If you are going to use regular laws of kazayit b'chtei achila pras is a problem and it's not nullified or anything, then we'd have to be concerned here that maybe the truma fell into the chulin. We're always very stringent when it comes to truma. So then we should be strict. And what does the halacha say? So they say, Sha'ani Omer, the Mishnah says, mutarim. Okay, if naflu elu toch elu, everything is permitted. In other words, not everything. The chulin is permitted. The truma is truma. Sha'ani Omer, because we can assume truma letoch, truma nafla, the chulin letoch, chulin naflu. We can assume the truma fell into truma, the chulin fell into chulin, and great. Okay, now this seems weird. If you're going to say it's really deoraita, amayam rinan shani omer truma letoch. How could we be lenient? If let's say the worst case scenario is the truma fell into chulin, I now eat that. It has, just like the shum and the shem and the garlic and the oil wasn't nullified, these spices aren't nullified. I ate truma spices, and let's say I eat enough of that. Let's say it's a soup. I ate enough of that soup that I ate a kazayit's worth of the spices that were truma. It would be a problem. So how on earth could we be lenient here if you're right, Rav Dimi, that we go by this kazayit b'chtei achila pras when it's mixed up in a mixture like this? So Amar le hanach letruma tavlin derabanan. Oh, this isn't a deoraita law. This is truma of spices. If you remember, we learned recently that the pasuk by truma says the first of your dagan tirosh v'yitzhal, your wheat and grains, the first of your oil, and the first of your wine. This isn't any one of them. This is spices. Spices are only rabbinic in nature. That's why we can be lenient. If it was Torah law, we'd be stringent. But it's not Torah law, so we can be lenient. The same type of answer is going to be given the second time, although already they're starting with an example of dagan, okay, of wheat, of grains, etive. So the second question he asks is from another Mishnah. Shtei kupot, echad shel chulin ve'echad shel truma. I think it's a Mishnah. Yeah, no, it's a Tosefta. Maybe, I don't know, I read the whole thing. Yeah, it looks like a Tosefta. If you have two containers, echad shel chulin ve'echad shel truma, that are full of dagan, Rashi says, okay, they're full of grains. And then you have a measurement, another batch of chulin and truma. And again, one fell into the other, same exact type case. But the main difference is that here we're talking about grains, okay? So we can't use the same laws that we used before. So, mutarin, everything's allowed. Shani omer, chulin l'toch chulin naflu, truma l'toch truma nafla. And again, so how can you say that if achila pras is doraita and the truma here is doraita, then how can you be lenient? So amarle hanach l'truma b'zman hazeh derabanan. He says, so it's true you're talking about grains, and grains are doraita when it comes to truma, but nowadays that we no longer have the temple and we no longer have the majority of the Jewish people living in Israel, truma already is only derabanan in nature. There's a whole machloket about whether truma after the destruction of the temple was derabanan doraita. We'll debate about this even after the first destruction. Anyway, I'm not going to go into that debate, but this source must hold that it's derabanan, and that's why they're lenient. And therefore, it doesn't raise a question, Rav Dimi says, on my theory. Okay, that was all dealing with Rabbi Yochanan, who held, remember, I'm just reminding you because now we're going to go back to the beginning. Kol isurin shebetorah ein heter mitzaref liisur chutz mi isurei nazir. And where does he learn it from? Mishrat. Mishrat Anavim comes to teach you that specifically in Nazir, heter mitzaref liisur, not anywhere else. Whereas Ze'eri said a few other cases also, like the Kuta Chabavli, like Chametz on Pesach, and like the burning of the Seor on the altar. But now the Gemara questions Rabbi Yochanan from a different place, right? Then we had all these questions of Rabbi Yochanan. What do you mean? Heter mitzaref liisur nowhere else? And then we said, that's different, that case, because that's Kizai b'chtei achila pras, and then we tried to say Kizai b'chtei achila pras in a mixture is really going to be forbidden. Look at these truma cases, and then we say, oh no, those truma cases are drabanan. So we're left with his opinion can stand. And now we have another question. Hi, mishrat lahach yudata. Wait, you're using the word mishrat to learn that. We use the word mishrat to learn something else, very important halacha, which is kind of similar. And again, like I said, it's a little bit where exactly we draw the line between these things is a little unclear. Hi, mibayle l'chiditanya. We need it for the following source. Mishrat litain tam ki ikar. What's mishrat? It's an example where I take bread and I soak it in wine. Okay, what did I think of? Tiramisu. Okay, when you make tiramisu, what do? You take these biscuits and you soak them in coffee. Now, if you think about tiramisu, what do you think about normally in the biscuit part? You normally don't really think about that you're eating biscuits. You normally think about the coffee because the coffee flavor is very strong. So what they want to say here is, from mishrat, where you have this wine-soaked bread, what do you really taste? You taste the wine, even though you don't see the wine. And the main thing is the bread. But the flavor of the wine permeates the bread and turns it into something of significance. So therefore, they learn from here that tam is ki'ikar. Okay, there's a big debate about what exactly tam ki'ikar means. Rashi says, la'asot ta'amo shel isur ki'ikaro u'mamasho. Now, according to Rashi, it sounds a little bit like heter mitzaref li'isur, because it sounds like what you're saying is the flavor is so strong that everything takes on the nature of the flavor, and then we're going to measure it based on the flavor in it. Okay, but it's not exactly the way we say it. But it does sound like Rashi's saying that even if you ate less than a kazayit, you'd be liable. The Balam Or disagrees entirely, and he says, no. What this means is you still have to eat a kazayit of Isser. It's not heter mitzaref le'Isser. You'd have to eat, if you ate, let's take the tiramisu case. If let's say the coffee was forbidden for some reason, you'd have to eat a full kazayit of coffee, even though that coffee flavor is very strong, not a kazayit of the biscuit. If so, then what's the chiddush? That's already, like we said before, kazayit b'chtei achila pras. What would be the point? So what he says is, again, what it's trying to say is, normally you would say, and this is where we get bitul b'shishim. Someone asked about bitul b'shishim. This is where we get it from. It's to tell you that as long as you taste the flavor, normally According to Torah law, everything's nullified in majority. So you have the majority of that tiramisu is the biscuit part is the biscuit. You dipped it in coffee. There's a little bit of coffee in it. You would think that the coffee is nullified to the biscuit because the biscuit's much larger. The fact is it's not. The coffee is still there. Now, still, according to be liable, you'd have to eat a kazayat worth of coffee. But the point is that it's not nullified. Okay, so there's different ways of understanding tam kikar, but this is the basis for batal b'shishin. Batal b'shishin means that already once there's 60 times, the rabbis assumed you no longer taste it, and then it can be nullified. But if there's still taste, it's not nullified. So now, he says like this. Why do we learn that from Mishrat? It's obvious. Let's say you took, okay, now they're not talking about bread. Let's say you took grapes and you soak them in water, and now the water tastes like wine. Chayav, you'd be liable. Mikan atadan lechol atorah kula. Now, different from the other drasha of Mishrat. Remember, Rabbi Yochanan learned from Mishrat and said it's only by the Nazir. Heter mitzaref l'isser. Now we're basically saying, number one, Rabbi Yochanan, how can you learn Mishrat to that when we already have a drasha that Mishrat in the Braita, remember Rabbi Yochanan's an Amora, you can't really disagree with the Braita. In that Braita, it says we learn Mishrat to teach you Tam Kikar, and then we learn from there for Tam Kikar applies across the board. It's not just unique by the Nazir. There we took Mishrat all the way. That's not really the Gemara's question, but I want to point out the difference to you. Here we learn from here to everything in the Torah. Now why? So the Braita continues, Uma Nazir. How do we know we can learn from Nazir? Because Nazir, it has three leniencies. Number one, Eini Suroi Soralam. You don't stay a Nazir forever. Usually it's a 30-day Nazirut. Number two, there's some people who interpret that a little differently, but I'll leave it with that. Number two, Eini Suroi Sorana'a. You can't eat grapes, but no one ever said you can't benefit from them. Let's say you have a vineyard, you can sell them. V'yesh hater li sulo. And eventually you're going to get out of it. In other words, it'll be permitted to you. It's not forbidden to you for the rest of your life. And yet, with all those three leniencies, asabotam kikal, and yet we say flavor is important. Therefore, kilayim, let's compare it to kilayim. Kilayim is when you plant two things next to each other, or too close to each other, right? Usually a vineyard and crops. She'isuro isor olam, it will be forbidden forever. Isuro isor hana'a, it's forbidden to benefit from. And ein heter l'isuro, and there's no way to permit this. There you have three stringencies. Of course, then eino din she'aseh tam kikal. And hu adin le'orla b'shtayim. Okay, and orla has two of those stringencies because orla is forbidden to benefit from, and they'll never be their isur is isur olam. Those fruits will be forbidden forever. There is a heter upcoming years. Okay, so it doesn't have the third. But anyway, therefore, we're going to assume we apply it across the board. So how does Rabbi Yochanan deal with this braita? And this drasha, if he has that drasha, he can't have the drasha that he said about heter mitzaref l'isser. So they say, Hamane Rabbanan hi Rabbi Yochanan Damarka Rabbi Akiva. Very simply, Rabbi Yochanan holds by a different Tana. This is one Tana, this is the rabbis, and Rabbi Yochanan holds by Rabbi Akiva. Now the Gemara obviously has to say, where do we say that Rabbi Akiva says heter mitzaref l'isser? That's what we basically want to find, and only by Nazir. So, hey Rabbi Akiva, which Rabbi Akiva? Ilema. Ilema always means if we say, and then we're going to reject it. If you say it's Rabbi Akiva dematnitin, Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah in Nazir says, Ditna. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Nazir shashara pito b'yayin. If a Nazir soaked his bread in wine, v'yesh bo l'tzaret kedei kezayid chayav, and you have enough to add up to an olive bulk, you'll be liable. So now they say you can't prove it from there. Why? When it says if you have enough of a kezayit, maybe it meant enough wine of a kezayit. Maybe it didn't mean the wine and the bread. It's not 100% clear from there. It's somewhat clear, but you could read it otherwise. So it can't be that one. So then they say, and you might say that would be ridiculous that he would be talking about kezayit of wine because that would be obvious. It wouldn't be adding anything. It would be obvious if you drank, if there was a whole kezayit of wine soaked in there and you ate all of the kezayit, of course you'd be obligated. Well, no, not so much so. You might not have known that because hakamashmalan ta'af agav de ta'arovet. Even though it's mixed in and you don't see the wine anymore, you'll still be liable. So it could be that's what the Mishnah means. Therefore, they say it's from a different source of Rabbi Akiva de Braita. Okay, Ella Rabbi Akiva de Braita. It's Rabbi Akiva who appears in the following Braita, where there it's explicit. Titania, Rabbi Akiva Omer, Nazir sheshara pito b'yayin, a Nazir who soaks his bread in wine, va'achal kezayit mipat u'miyayin, And then he ate a kazayit. How much? What did it say here? Of wine and bread. There you have it. You can't read this any other way other than saying heter is mitzaref to isul chayav. And therefore, we now say, okay, very clear. Rabbi Yochanan learns mishrat to the heter mitzaref le'isser, just like Rabbi Akiva. And he was like Rabbi Akiva, this bright that learns from mishrat tam ki'ikar learns like the rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Akiva. However, what are we left with? We have a big question now. Tam ki'ikar, does Rabbi Yochanan not learn tam ki'ikar? No, everyone holds tam ki'ikar. So now we have to say Rabbi Akiva tam ki'ikar menale. Where does he get it from? So now we're going to have a whole section to figure out where does he get it from. So they say, oh, yalef mi basar b'chalav. What's basar b'chalav? Okay, let's take the classic example in the Torah. Milk falls into meat. Now, when milk falls into meat, what happens? Exactly, right? It disappears. You don't see the milk. The milk dissolves. What do you do, though? You taste it. That's the whole idea. That's tam ki'ikal. So he says, we learn it from basar b'chalav. Lav tama ba'almahu. Is it not just taste that's in there? There's nothing real in there. It's just milk. The milk dissolves. You don't see the milk anymore. And yet it's usher. That teaches you tam ki'ikal. And that's why, again, batal b'shishim, because then you no longer have flavor, taste. But if you taste it, it's obviously forbidden. So, hachanami loshna. Therefore, we'll say the same thing across the board. So, that would be a good example. So why the rabbis learn it from Mishrat? Wouldn't you rather learn it from a typical example rather than a case of a Nazir? So, Rabbanami basar b'chalav lo gamrinan dechidushu. The rabbis say, no, you can't learn from basar b'chalav because that's a unique halacha. The whole concept of basar b'chalav is unique. Okay, right. If you say something is a chidush, then that teaches you whatever is true about it is only there. You can't learn it anywhere else. And we already know the tam ki'ikar, you can learn for every case. So why is it a chidush? So now we have to figure out why do we think why the rabbis say it's a chidush? Ilema, if you want to say, again, we'll reject this, but if you want to say, hai lechude v'hai lechude shari ubahada yadade asur, what's unique about basar b'chalav and strange? Normally, isser and heter, right? You have truma and you have chulin and they mix together. Truma was truma before, chulin was chulin before, and you mix them together. Now it's just a combination of something that was forbidden before with something that's permitted. But basar b'chalav, each was permitted beforehand, right? Basar you could eat and chalav you can eat, and only because you combine them does it make it forbidden. That sounds pretty unique, but it's not so unique because they say, Ela di'itara le kule yoma b'chava shar. Sorry, I skipped a line. Kilaim nami, ha'lechude v'ha'lechude shari ubahadade asur. But kilaim is the same thing. You have these seeds and you have those seeds, right? You have your vineyard you're planting and you have your grains that you're planting, and you can plant those separately. You can plant those separately. Everything's permitted. And the whole problem is when you put them together. So that's not unique. So forget that. Next. So Ella, it must be di'itarule kule yoma b'chava share b'shale b'shule asur. If I soak my meat all day long in milk, that's not usher by Torah law. I'm not saying you should go do it, but it's not usher by Torah law. Only if I cook it is it forbidden. That's unique. Okay? That's a unique halacha. So therefore, the rabbis say it's a chidush. Well, if the rabbis just proved it's a chidush and you can't learn from it, and Rabbi Akiva tried to learn from it, well, let's ping pong back to Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva nami basar b'chalav v'dai chidushu. He also has to agree that it's unique and that there's no other law like that. So, he learns it from, in this Torah, it describes in the end of Sefer B'midbar that there was a war with the Midyanim and the Jews took their pots and they koshered them. Now, why do you have to kosher the pots? What they could have just cleaned them out, right? So, isn't it just that there was flavor in the pots, taste, and that when they cooked it, they would have the taste of the ham or whatever it might be of the Gentiles, of the Midyanim. So hachinami loshna. So there you see ta'am, and that teaches us tam ki'ikal. So why don't the rabbis learn it from there? Why do they have to learn it from Nazir? They also say that's a unique law. Why is it unique? Generally, if something gives out bad flavor, and the assumption is this is a basic law in kashrus, that if you leave it for more than 24 hours, or it's called not ben yomo, it's not from that day, we can already assume that whatever taste in it, right? You wouldn't eat something that was a day old sitting out. So the flavor that's in that pot is already bad. It'll give bad flavor and it shouldn't be forbidden. Yet here they forbade it anyway. That's a unique halacha. It doesn't really match what we know in general about laws of kashrus. So, and how do we know that with nevela, we learned that if the nevela goes bad, a dead animal, a carcass, and it spoils, you're actually not obligated if you eat it once it's spoiled and disgusting tasting. So now we're going to say, if that's the case, so again, how could Rabbi Akiva learn it from there? Rabbi Akiva, he learns it from him. He thought that the example was, this is a good question about reality. The case was that they had used their pots that day, and that's why they had to kosher them. You wonder why they didn't just wait. But the point is, he thinks that it was a regular case of kashrus, and you see that Tom was a problem, and therefore you can learn from here to everywhere else. Now they assume the rabbis must have also heard what this rabbi said, that it was really that same day. So what does he say? There's an interesting answer. Even from the same day, it must have had some bad taste in it, because whatever's left in the pot must have given out some bad flavor. And that's why they think it was a unique halacha. And you can't learn from it, whereas Rabbi Akiva thinks it's the same halacha. Okay, we're going to end here for today. So the next part starts a question on another question in the series of about the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva, and we'll start with this tomorrow. Okay, have a great day, everybody, and we'll meet up tomorrow and continue. Like I said, this is one of those dapim that just has very basic sugyot that come up, particularly when it comes to Isser V'Heter and food issues and tam. Okay, and there's a lot more to be said. If you want, you can try to Google some articles about it to see if you want to read more in depth about it.